Hey everyone, let's turn this rough sketch into a tiny world inside a bottle. Now, ever since I was a little kid, I would imagine worlds inside containers, anything from bottles to boxes. So to make this one, we're going to use paint as a sculpting material, a little clay, a little wood, and even a little insulation. So follow along and see if you can steal some of these ideas for your own amazing artwork. I'm starting by scraping the printing off this bottle with a box cutter blade held almost flat. Now, any process I use to clean off the ink will make a mess, but I'd rather a dry mess over a wet one any day, and scraping doesn't take that long anyway. But with my bottle cleaned, I'll get the dirt and grass ready. I'll explain those sheets of clay in a second, but since I don't have any model materials, I'm using dried clay for the dirt. And once I have my pulverized clay, I'll make a little funnel with a scrap of plastic, so it's easier to scoop up and pour the clay in. And then since clay is really just dirt, I can use it straight. It just takes a lot of tamping down to press it in place. I started with a wooden dowel rod because I was afraid of damaging the glass, but I switched to a metal rod because it's heavier and it presses the clay down much better. I also decided I had too much clay in there, and pouring some of it out made this process much easier. And then I locked the surface in place with a little water. And if you're curious where I got this clay, I'll leave a link to that video in the description. Those sheets of clay were me trying to avoid what I'm doing here, and that's painting the grass on directly. But once I crumbled all those sheets of painted clay, they were more brown than the green or blue I intended. I ended up cleaning the overpaint using a bit of paper towel around that dowel rod, but let me know in the comments if you have any ideas of how I could have done this differently. And then while that grass dries, I'll make a little river. I'm starting by thickly painting a mix of blue and white on a plastic lid, but I'll link to a short where I make these paint stickers in the description. While that dries overnight, I estimated the shape of the space inside the bottle, and I did that by wrapping the metal handle of a takeout box around the bottle. After sketching that shape, I subtracted the bottle's wall thickness and drew the little river and lake, and then I cut that out as a template. Once my paint sheet was dry, I carefully peeled it off the plastic lid and put it on some baking parchment so it didn't stick to my table. And the mistake I made here was using painter's tape on my paint sheet. I was able to cut out the river, but the tape stuck so well I couldn't get it off no matter what I did. So I ended up using that cutout as my template, which luckily didn't stick too much to the final cutout. Then I gently coiled it around the same dowel rod I've been using and dropped it into the bottle. And since it sticks to the other paint, I can just press it in place with the dowel rod. That's when I discovered one end of my river was too long and I had no way to cut it or take it out. My solution ended up being simply to fold over the extra and press it in place. And then while I was doing that, I actually pressed the water into the ground, and that gave me a little river bank and lake shore. Then I added a thick layer of new paint over the lake to blend it all in. While I figure out how to make and suspend the waterfall, I'm going to add a little house. If you've seen my other work, you know I have a running theme of these little white houses with black windows and doors. I don't know the significance of them, and my own house isn't black and white. Either way, I'm cutting this little block of wood to size, and then sanding the bottom flat. And then I used a box cutter to cut out the roof, and then I sanded those as flat as I could get them. The rest of the takeout box handle and the wood block will reappear as a little paint stand, and then after a coat of basic titanium white, I'll add the doors and windows. This by far is my smallest brush, but the area and these features are so small I'm painting with the very tip. And each of these features is so small it actually only takes a couple of dots to fill them in. Once the house is dry, I added an archival paper roof to smooth and even it out. I've learned that I'll get more accuracy measuring off the objects themselves, and you'll get a straighter line if you mark at least 3 points. I painted the white paper white because I wanted to match the rest of the house. Instead of using glue, I just painted the paper in place, which will actually come back to bite me later. Now, while I'm waiting for that to bite me later, let's get the house in the bottle. I added a blob of paint to the bottom just to glue it in place. Now, that at least worked. And I'm using these bamboo skewers as really long tweezers. Now, the thing was, when I came back the next day, one side of the roof had popped up. So I just cut my losses and ended up gluing it down with a dot of clear contact cement. To stall for even more time before making that waterfall, I made the clouds from some insulation from one of those meal kits. It's nice and fluffy, and it will hold its shape. Now, you might be able to use cotton or other fluffy stuff, but this is just what I had on hand. Measuring against the bottle, I shaped the clouds with a pair of scissors and then painted them white. The challenge is that they love to stick to everything. So my painting technique devolved into more smashing on the paint than actually trying to paint it on. Oh, and I moved them to a cleaner tray. That's just because I didn't want any of the dry paint from the original tray to leave little flakes on the clouds. And that means that all I have left now is to make that waterfall. To make the waterfall, I used a piece of that same takeout box handle as an armature. I covered it in a super thick coat of blue for the water still in the clouds, and titanium white for the falling water. When that side dried, I dropped more paint on the back. Now, I'm hoping it will shrink down to the size I want when it dries. If not, I'll end up carving it down, and that just kind of risks damaging it, and I really don't have time to make a new one. At this point, I ended up going out of town for a few days, and when I came back, my waterfall was still too thick. So I just ended up trimming it down and coating it in some more white paint. But I'm actually really happy with the way it turned out. Now the trick is to get the clouds in place. Now, off camera, I fiddled with the first one for a while, and I learned a ton about getting them in place. It turned out I glued myself into a corner because I was impatient, and I glued the waterfall to the second cloud before trying to get it into the bottle. To fix that, I ended up clipping off part of the waterfall, and then I was able to stuff the cloud through the bottleneck. And because I was expecting it to take way more time, the cloud went in nice and easy, and I was able to get the contact cement in place with very little mess. And then with the clouds in and dry, it's now time to do what I think is the hardest part, and that's getting the waterfall into place. And I'm back to using my bamboo skewers to drop it in place. I added a little contact cement under the waterfall to hold it to the cloud, and then I was able to push it in place. But once I got it in place, it was just a little cleanup and final painting, and now I can show you the finished piece. And look at that, I even found the original cork. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by hitting the like button and subscribing. Not only does that mean a lot to me, I'd love to have you as part of the on-hand art community. And if you did like this video, I'll leave a link to one that YouTube thinks you'll also like. But thanks for watching, and remember, you are creative.